What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Twinmotion video. In this video we're going to be looking at everything weather. That's exciting. Atmospheric weather. It's pretty realistic within Twinmotion. I'm really happy to share it with you. If at any point in this video you do happen to learn something or just like the video, if you wouldn't please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot. So let's get into it now. So I've got my scene and it's, the middle of the afternoon, but we don't really have any weather going on. So let's add some weather and see what we can do as far as adjusting the weather. For this video, I think I will place myself on the ground plane so we can see from the ground all of these changes as they update. So we're on the ground here. So we're going to find all of our weather settings in the settings here, in the settings tab, and then weather. Now before we get into this, I actually want to say that I actually have created a location video, and I would recommend you watch that first and set your location, because of course part of the weather itself and the sun in particular is based on the location. So make sure that's correct first, and the location actually affects more than just the sun, and we will get into that when it comes to the weather. So first, my location, I have it set to Dallas, Texas-ish. That's good enough. Somewhere close. That's basically where I want to work, where the site is. I haven't messed with my north offset at all or anything like that. Yeah, ignore the mountains when it comes to Dallas, Texas. You won't see those here. So looking at the weather, the actual weather, there's not a lot that we can do here, but we can start to adjust it and see what happens. So these are just giant sliders, and it goes from sun to cloudy to sun, and then what also looks like sun, snowman to sun, and we've got the weather and the season. The weather is simply how cloudy is it, or is there snow? So we go from sunny to eventually we've got some more clouds. I'm going to adjust the sun slightly so we can see more of the clouds pop in. So we've got the clouds, they're all gone over here, and then as we move more towards the clouds, we get to start to see more clouds, and then eventually it becomes like the sun is lost a bit because of all the clouds, fully cloud covered, and eventually we get to the point where it is actually raining. And we can tell it's raining because we've got water on the ground. This is really cool. It's a realistic part of Twinmotion, the fact that you can actually show the particles of the rain as well as have the water start to accumulate on these ground surfaces. It's really cool. So we can, again, continue to move this. It'll rain a bit harder, and then eventually we will come back around the other side to the point where we kind of undo everything that we've done. So I don't know necessarily why that we need to go from sun to cloudy back to sun in one slider. I don't know if I'm missing something, but one side of the slider essentially looks the exact same as the other side. So if you know the reason why, if I'm just missing something, please let me know. I'd love to know. But the fact that we could go from rain or shine in this slider is where you're going to want to look at that. Season. So I can't necessarily tell you what season is what, other than the snowman clearly is winter. The others are probably summer. Let's say we're looking at the same situation. We're going from sunshine to clouds back to sunshine. We're probably looking at summer to winter and then back to summer. But in reality, we actually do have like an autumn, so we can start to see an actual difference between autumn versus spring. So it might end up being that autumn and spring are somewhere in the middle too. But let's start to adjust this and see. And we can see as we start to affect this slider, we start to see some changes, but it's mainly just in the grass. But eventually it's kind of abrupt. Actually, we get this abrupt change, and there's all of a sudden there's snow on the ground. So we could see actually that we do go from, on the trees, a more of a spring or summer, more to a fall, with that orange and red showing up in some of these trees. And we can see that even off into the distance. And even as we get to this point, we can all of a sudden get snow on the ground. So there's snow. Snow is now on the ground, and if I look down, we can see there's snow between all the grass blades there. And again, even more snow once we get like into the dead of winter. Some of the trees come off, or some of the leaves come off the trees. Depending on the type of tree, that does not necessarily happen. And then going beyond winter, we can see we start to come back to more of a summer spring look besides the trees, but then eventually we do find ourselves back at 100% green, everything. So it in a way does loop similar to the weather and the sun over here. So that's kind of nice, but it is I'm really impressed with the fact that you can change the season. Not only that, but that the colors actually change and we get snow on the ground. All that's automatic. But I want you to take note of this. I have actually set my background in my location. I've set the background here to be mountains because, again, that makes sense in somewhere Dallas, Texas-ish. So I've got the mountains here. We can see they're green, but I want you to pay attention to that as I change the weather, or actually when I change the season. So as I change the season, there as I hit autumn, we can see that these trees or greens or whatever they were in the background image are now more of an orange kind of autumn color. And when I change this eventually to a winter, we could see that we actually get snow showing up on these mountains, like in the background image. That's just an image. There's nothing fancy about it, but nonetheless, it's automatically doing that. And again, as I go away from winter, I get more into the green. We can see more green populate. I'm really impressed by that, and it just adds to the realism that Twinmotion just creates for you out of the box, which is really exciting. We've probably covered this before. If you've looked at any of my vegetation videos, we have looked at the growth, and I'm fascinated by the growth because it's not, and this is a great new feature within 2020, the fact that we can actually have a tree or vegetation grow as opposed to simply scale up or down. So the idea of growing is that, yes, they do become larger or smaller, but they're like the mass of them actually changes and not just what they look like. So increasing the growth will, if I look over here, we can see all these trees. This is basically the master override of growth. So if I have this growth down at 0, they're as small as they can be. Whereas if I start to increase this, we can see that the growth of all these trees will change like to their max when I get to 1. So that's really cool and really easy to adjust that. And it is between 0 and 1. You can't go beyond 1. So that's pretty simple to understand. 0.5 is the default. We can leave it right there. That's just fine. So now let's start to look at some of the effects when it comes to weather. There aren't that many, but they're very important. So we've got wind speed, the direction of the wind. We've got smog and particles. So let's first look at smog. We'll get to wind in just a second. Smog, obviously it makes sense. We can see the default's 15%, and it's kind of even hard to tell at 15% what it's doing. But as I increase this, you can definitely see the level of smog increase greatly. And I'll be honest, this looks very realistic. And the fact that we have smog showing up like this, you could probably double this as fog. It is more of a smog in that it's a lighter color and it's not thick looking, but nonetheless it does work for both, and it's pretty exciting to see. So yeah, the 15% is the default. We can leave it there. Particles on, I believe this is affecting, if we turn this off and we go back to our weather here and put the weather to where it's raining, like it would actually be raining right now, we should be able to see water. The fact that I have particles off is where that comes into play. So I'll turn them on now. We can start to see there my particles are now back on, and that's related to the rain. I don't necessarily want the particles, or I don't necessarily want it to be raining right now. So let's adjust this back to there. And let's look at wind speed now, or wind and wind speed. So by default, the wind is on, and we can tell that the wind is on if we look at like all these blades of grass or some of these trees. I'm going to really zoom in here so we can start to see. Clearly there is wind because the leaves are moving, and if you look pretty particularly at all these blades of grass, they're slightly moving. Now just to increase this, and we can definitely see it, let's increase the wind speed to the point where these things are now jittering, and we can clearly see that with this increased wind speed that these objects are in a higher wind environment. So there we can see these leaves moving a lot more. So the direction. It's going to be hard to tell that this is actually doing anything until I bring something in. And so what I want to do is I'll bring this wind speed back down to 0 or to 1. the default. But what I want to do is actually bring in a flag, because this will 100% make it more clear as to what is actually happening. So I'm going to go to Objects, and then City, and then Flags. And I want to just use this windsock because it will really help us take a look at the wind and how it's working. I'm going to take us off of the ground plane, so where we're actually able to fly, and I want to get straight up above where this flag is. And I can begin to do that this way. So there we go. I am 100% straight up above the flag. So I don't need to select the flag for this necessarily. But what I want to do is start to look at our weather. So if I look at our weather, go back to my effects and my wind speed, I can increase the wind speed there, and of course it's going to flap faster. But we want to look at the direction. So this direction is currently 0, and obviously as I increase this to a different degree, you can notice that the windsock itself, or like the structure of the windsock, does not move, but the direction of the sock does actually move with the wind. So if I leave it somewhere right here, we can see that, yeah, the actually pole and structure of the wind of the flag does not move, but the sock does. So let's put that back at 0. So you might be asking, like, okay, well, is this just an arbitrary degree? Well, at first glance, it looks that way. But let's go back to my location. So my location here, again, I'm somewhere in Dallas. It does not necessarily matter. But what I want to do is orient my camera to where I've got my north at the top, so that just makes a little more sense. But I also want to start to look at the direction of the wind. So I'm going to leave my camera here, knowing that we have north straight up on my screen. Let's go back to the weather. Looking at the weather now, back to effects, we can see that my direction is at 0. So this is just something you should know, and it will be helpful moving forward, that the wind at 0 degrees is technically east, like due east. And that's really helpful to know, because now as soon as I put this up to a different degree, you can see it starts to rotate clockwise a certain degree. And right now, 90 degrees, that actually makes sense. That makes sense as to 90 degrees. And then if I put this closer to a 180, we can start to see that, yes, that is now due west. And then again, 270, we get the similar idea of this being straight up north. That's great. That will be really helpful in knowing that this direction is based on your actual location, which I would have hoped it would be set up that way, and thankfully it is. That east is 0 degrees. Perfect. Glad we know that. That's really nice, really helpful. Moving forward now. So finally, looking back at this, the last effect here, it's ocean. And so ocean is pretty cool in that you can simply easily introduce an ocean or a large body of water around your model in just a second. So right now, yes, I have this model with water in it already. This is just a model topography in Revit that I've brought in and added water to the material. Okay, water to the object, great. So in a sense, that's doing the job for me, but I might want to trade this out for a more realistic looking, and I would say more effectively modeled ocean or body of water in this case. So something I can easily do is simply enable that. And as soon as I enable that, I get this second layer of ocean, of water here. And so that's all based on this height. And of course we've got the material, but let's look at the height. So I can freely adjust the height of the ocean easily, and you can see it in the background below my model because I'm sitting so low here. But as I bring this up, you can clearly see what happens, and the immediate effect that it has, we could simply drown our entire model in an ocean or a large body of water in simply no time. And we can actually get to the point where we're underwater, and I bet you didn't think about doing underwater renderings within Twinmotion. In fact, you can, because the camera even adjusts for underwater, which is absolutely fascinating. And we can tell when I get out of the water here, it even releases water from the lens. As if there's water on the lens, it slowly drains off. Like, you could have this as an effect in your video, but it's not even really effect, it's just simply moving throughout your scene. So, okay, we clearly don't need an ocean this high, obviously. But the one thing you might want to know is how to set the height, because maybe you're completely particular like I am, and you work in Revit like I do, and you want to be precise like me. Well, we need to find a way to set this height to a particular height and know that, all right, it's where I need it to be, it's where I want it to be. Or maybe you have a project that's on a lake and you want to actually model in the correct lake levels. Like, you can get to this point. So I'm actually going to jump now to Revit, and this is my same scene. And of course, I've got my topography. It's ridiculous topography, but here's my topography. And specifically, I just happen to have this body of water modeled in as a floor, not topography, but nonetheless, that's fine. But what I can do is I can actually get a dimension from this to find out where it is. So I model everything, like as far as coordinate goes, I model everything as level 1 being like 100 feet in the air to deal with any like levels below 100 or below level 1, basement levels. I don't want to use negative numbers. I'd rather use levels, like numbers in the 90s. But besides that, that's the reason you'll see some of these numbers. But I'm going to go to my spot elevation, and I just want to get I'm actually going to use this, and I'm going to isolate this element so I could get some of the edges. And at this point, let's use the spot elevation, and I want to get some of the elevation of the edges. So this is telling me that this edge is at 85.6, or it's 15 feet or 14 feet 6 inches below level 1. Okay, so what does that have to do with the ocean in Twinmotion? Well, what I want to do now is I'll bring this back, and let's go back to Twinmotion. And the reason I wanted to do that is to get a number, and I can simply put that number in here because Twinmotion is using the exact same coordinate system from Revit because I used the direct link. Now, this would not be the case if I were to have imported my model and simply dropped it and placed it wherever I wanted. This is everything you see that's modeled that's not Twinmotion is from Revit. It is modeled in Revit with Revit's coordinate system, and the direct link will allow me to place these objects at the exact location. So looking back at the ocean, I can actually set this to my 85.5 and get that location perfectly. And the reason I know I can do that is because now I'm going to hide this floor, and I have the water showing up at that exact same level. But now it's actually an ocean and not just a model that I have applied a water material to. So again, there it is. It's the exact location that I had it before from my Revit model. And it really saves me the trouble of having to actually model in water or a surface that would contain water in my Revit model. I don't want to have to do that, and I don't need to. So that's literally a way we could perfectly get a lake level or a water level. Now, if you're looking at my scene now, you'll see a boat back here, and it's obviously not following, it's on a path, and it's obviously not in the right place because it's basically under the water, and that doesn't make any sense. But the reason it's under the water is because this path was made on top of this site floor, and the paths are smart enough because I used physics to actually find a ground plane. In this case, it found the ground plane as like the default floor within Twinmotion. But as soon as I turn this back on, you can see that the boat pops back up, and clearly this is, I don't know what we're watching here, but I think we should turn away. But we've got two different boats on top of itself, and the reason it did that way is because we've got the path that is following the ground plane, and I basically, by hiding this, removed the ground plane, and I have an ocean. So the ocean does not serve as a ground plane, just so you're aware. So I would again I like the ocean, and I like the fact that I can set it at a particular height to get it exact, but I also want to keep this custom path where it is. So I'd probably need to go back and adjust this path to work better and really bring all that whole path up to that point to where it actually follows on top of the ocean instead of the floor beneath, the default floor beneath. So that will do it for weather. We went through everything that has to do with weather, wind, clouds, all the seasons and snow and rain and everything, the wind. It's pretty cool. There's a lot that you can do. You can completely flood your whole model with an ocean if you want. And honestly, that's not a bad thing to do if you're trying to, see what a flood situation would look like. That's pretty interesting that you could do that, and you could bake that into an animation and produce that as a video. I will cover that later, but I sure hope you did learn something. If you wouldn't mind demolishing that like button, it really helps me out a lot. Also consider changing the phase of that subscribe button to existing. That also helps me out so much, and I thank you all who have. If you made it this far in the video, you're awesome, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.